It is Friday, November 3rd. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another dastardly episode of LTPS. As always, let's begin with our PS Plus Essential Reminder. If you have not just yet, this is your last call to claim the October games before they go away, so make sure you get that done. November 7th, it's going to change over to Mafia 2 Definitive Edition on PS4, Aliens Fireteam Elite on PS4, PS5, and Dragon Ball The Breakers PS4, PS5 as well. Mafia 2, I would say, is a lot of fun. Don't really have much experience with the other two games, but at least from what I'm seeing, it sounds like this might be more of an underwhelming month for PS Plus, which we're bound to have those every so often, right? So, yeah, not the best month, but at the very minimum, I can vouch for Mafia 2. That one can be a lot of fun. But anyway, moving on to more PS Plus news, we saw that Sony launched the Sony Pictures Core app not that long ago, which had a benefit for PS Plus premium users where there's 100 movies on there to watch for free. And now there's another benefit that is finally available for all tiers on PS Plus, which is a discount. So about 15% off for rentals or purchases through the Sony Pictures Core application. So not a bad way to pick up some movies or rent something if you're looking to watch something on the weekend coming up. But there's also a new benefit for PS Plus Premium members, which is they have a 24-hour early access window to watch the weekly compilation episodes for the recent release of Silent Hill Ascension, which is that ongoing choose your own path sort of thing, which is a community-driven effort. I don't know, it looks very weird, but it's something where there's going to be compilation episodes every single time that takes place, and so premium members can watch those compilation episodes one day early. A very specific, PS Plus perk, but that is something you can do. Honestly, the 15% off for I think every tier is a lot more usable, but that's something you can start doing now. Now, probably the more noteworthy PS Plus news from this past week is that PS5 game streaming functionality is now finally live in the US, which means they've properly rolled this out in all countries and regions that they originally announced. So, at least from what I'm seeing in terms of the reception, it is one of those things where it's very, I guess lukewarm in terms of the sort of impact it's having, right? Because cloud streaming is still not exactly an exciting prospect, but it is very much a large milestone in, PlayStation history where they've finally launched proper PS5 server blades that you would presume are very likely going to be the standard moving forward, especially as they can play PS4 games in theory. So over time, they might start retiring the PlayStation 4 server blades, and this is part of their long-term roadmap for, making cloud a lot more viable over time. But in the here and now, it's something where it's very premature, only for PS5 games, 2 PS5 consoles, and the reception so far, while it has been not exactly widespread critical acclaim, at the very minimum, a lot of people were very surprised by how well they do work, and that was my experience streaming off of what I assume were Japanese data centers. So even then, experiencing a few hiccups that I did, it was still really impressive in that use case. So the US ones are, at least initially from what I've seen, a little bit better, which should make sense. I'll be spending a lot more time with them, but for the time being, we now have PlayStation 5 game streaming live for premium members in most countries where they wanted to roll this out, which was a lot more than they have previously offered so far, but there's still a lot more work to be done in this area, obviously. Now that is a great segue into our next news story, which is about a new acquisition that SIE has announced for the company iSIZE, which is not a game developer. They're primarily a UK-based company that specializes in deep learning for video streaming, so they build AI solutions for bitrate savings, which in turn leads to improving video quality over streaming. And this is something where SIE has talked about how they want to bring them on board, and they're going to help with significantly improving their expertise that they can apply to their R&D and video streaming efforts in-house. And that's really all they said. They didn't really elaborate too much on this, which kind of goes into the, ongoing secrecy around their cloud streaming efforts. It's been like that since the PS3 and PS4 server blades. So something where there's not really much transparency in terms of, the technology and what they've built in-house and what they license out and things like that. So it's probably something where they'll be absorbed and we won't hear about them ever again, or they might already be using the technology this company supplies, and it just made more sense to completely acquire them, kind of like the same deal with what Sony did for that recent audio company with the magnetic planar drivers, right? So just something where it's a long-term play, and we should be seeing either we're already seeing it or we'll see more improvements over time, but that much is kind of a given. Now, speaking of that recent audio acquisition, we can also mention that we finally have confirmed release dates for the Pulse Elite and the Pulse Explorer. So the Pulse Explorer comes out on December 6th, and the Pulse Elite February 21st. You can pre-order both on November 9th, very soon on PlayStation Direct, and also as an additional reminder, you can also pre-order separate PlayStation Link adapters for $24.99 USD or £19.99. But those are the Link adapters where they do already come with them to connect those to a PS5 or a PC. But if you want another Link adapter to connect to another device that you might have, then you can pre-order those as well, because again, that's one of the big angles of these new headphones that Sony is launching. Not just that they have magnetic planar drivers or that the Pulse Explorer are proper small wireless earbuds, but you have the new wireless protocol that Sony is making for these headphones, and that's also something where technically that means now there's no official day one wireless option for the PlayStation Portal, because that's coming out before the Pulse Explorer. So unless you want to just use a wired headphone setup or you buy a separate third-party Bluetooth adapter, which I would imagine that would work just fine, but still kind of a pain that you would have to do that. But that would mean that by day one there's no proper official offering, which we know is only the PlayStation Link headphones. So it would be the Explorer or the Elite. But either way, we finally have release dates, and I've seen a lot of people really hounding Sony for those release dates. There's a lot of people really looking forward to these headphones, so now we finally know when they are coming. Moving on to our next news story, we have a rumor being reported by Area Hugones, a site that's previously posted accurate leaks in the past, and this time around they're citing a source close to Sony claiming that there's a new God of War game that's going to be announced very soon, possibly at the Game Awards, which for this report they keep calling it a DLC, but then towards the bottom they do make the suggestion that this could actually be more of a standalone release, similar to a Miles Morales or possibly a Lost Legacy. And that's really all we have from that report, but this does kind of go back to, what was it, about 2 months ago, where we initially had a rumor from the Snitch that some kind of new God of War content was coming, and at the time they had mentioned that they weren't sure if that was going to be DLC or some kind of standalone release. And then we had the one recent area user, Ashong, that's been privy to a lot of things going on at Santa Monica, make the suggestion that, whatever is being discussed and speculated is not what we think it is. So it seems like we've at least got more mounting evidence that we might be seeing more God of War content sooner rather than later. But if I would just like to throw my hat in the ring here, I would like to say that I would be all for more standalone sort of budget scale releases, these sort of 1.5 entries for a lot of these well-known franchises that quite frankly I mean, they're fantastic games, but sometimes it takes a long time for these AAA big budget titles to come out, right? So when we're looking at a 4 or 5 year dev cycle, sometimes longer, for that next big single player epic, that's a long time to wait. So, and it just seems like there's way too much upside to doing that standalone, premium DLC release, right? Whatever you want to label it, but it's simply a matter of doing what DLC typically does, which is exploring a character, doing more world building, fleshing out ideas and things that you couldn't do in the outgoing product. And for the developers, that's very much the upside, is that there's easy turnaround with, you have all these assets that were fleshed out and built from that outgoing release. The publisher, it's great for them. They're not funding a project that's nearly as large, and it's still a commercial release that they can expect, and it's a way to monetize the game that they had already shipped. And assuming you've got this pipeline where another team's already working on the next product, then again, it's very much a half-step thing where, at that point, then you only have to wait another 2-something years for the next big major release. But it just seems like a great way to make palatable content for the consumer. It works out great for the publisher. The studio can, make more games, obviously. I wish we had more of it. So in the case of Ragnarok, God of War, slight spoilers, obviously, but it's a matter of okay, we can see more Atreus. He can kind of go off and, do his own thing. We can see more of his story, and there's a lot more that they can do with that character, right? And I'm all for it. I think that would be great. So if we are apparently going to see this at the Game Awards, then we don't have to wait very long to find out more about if this is really a thing. But I hope it is, because I truly do wish more and more studios would do this. And does this not solve the problem of the ongoing unsustainability of this business, where it takes a massive amount of money to put together these big budget single player and multiplayer games, for that matter, right? So it just seems like this is something that should be more commonplace. Moving on to some Spider-Man 2 news, or more speculation, I should say, because that's primarily what has happened this past week, is that there's been a lot of talk about possible Spider-Man 2 DLC, or what we could be expecting once it's finally going to release, if that is going to be the case. Insomniac's done that before, right? So it would be fair speculation to say that we might be getting some DLC, but it's more a matter of this primarily focusing on the Nelson and Murdoch plaque that was in the prior game, and this time around the plaque was empty. The plaque was still there, but there was no name on it, right? So people were wondering what was going on. What also went viral recently was that secret room where there's a number of possible references as an Easter egg to what many thought could be referencing the Hand. So a lot of people were thinking, oh, maybe some Daredevil DLC or something like that was was coming up, right? That was Insomniac laying down the groundwork for maybe expecting some Daredevil DLC or something like that. But then the recent patch that came out, which standard affair patch, nothing too crazy, but they did throw back in the plaque, or they put the name back on the plaque. So Nelson and Murdoch is back on there, and the creative director, Brian and Tahar, did cheekily mention on Twitter that, I guess they paid their rent. So after he was told about it, he went, oh yeah, interesting. Oh, stay tuned. It's funny how he said that, and then almost, immediately after, it was like a day or two after, that patch went out and the name is back on there. So it seems like that was maybe just a simple mistake, although I'm sure they're just, playing with fans the best that they possibly can here. They're not going to tell anybody what they're actually up to and what kind of new content they're working on. But I found it also interesting that Brian was recently on the Kind of Funny show, and he was being interviewed and asked a number of questions. It was a really good show, and but one thing he did confirm is that for the upcoming Wolverine game, that is in the same universe. He said they're both 1048. That's the Marvel Insomniac universe. So they're living in the same universe. Not sure if there's going to be any sort of direct ties, or if we should really be expecting direct ties. I would say probably not. But for those curious, it is in the same universe that Insomniac has been fleshing out for at least the Spider-Man properties. Next up, we got to talk about this Gran Turismo 7 update, which just came out. It's the Spec 2 update. It's one of those major headline updates, which is adding a lot of new things to the game. Like, for example, 4-player split screen on... It's only for PlayStation 5, but it's just such a rare, uncommon occurrence nowadays to have 4-player split screen for a modern racer. So that was really cool to see. But there's also a new snow-based track. There's 7 new cars, including the Dodge Challenger SRT Demon, Lexus LFA, Model 3 Performance, Porsche 911 GT3 RS. There's 3 extra menus added to the GT Cafe. There's new master license events. There's a few menus that have been completely revamped and redesigned, and also, most notably, is the AI driver Gran Turismo Sophy, now on 2.0, has gotten a wide release. So it can be played with 340 cars on 9 different tracks now. And I have not had much time to try that out, but I do remember a long time ago when they announced GT Sophy, I think I had made some kind of comment about how, we always see weird experimental technology like this announced, and, it's long forgotten and we never see it again, when really they actually used it almost immediately with only a few cars and 1 or 2 tracks or something. It was a very limited kind of release, but at the time, even then, people were saying that it very much felt like more of a human driver than, sort of the standard AI that kind of just stays where it is and doesn't, drive too aggressive or this and that, right? So now GT Sophy does very much have a wide release in the entire base game, which is interesting, because if it does feel more like you're racing against, another human, then that's the most competitive way to get into, well, that's what's going to make it feel as competitive as possible without jumping into online races and dealing with actual other human players. So having a sort of offline, well, it's not offline because Gran Turismo 7 is not offline, but not having to play and race online actively against other players is, I guess that's the benefit here, right, to race against GT Sophy. But yeah, I was wrong. I mean, they are very much using it and expanding it in a big way. So it seems like a massive update for GT, especially with the menu revamp as well. A lot of menus look a bit different, right? So one of those headline updates for Gran Turismo might be worth checking the game out or jumping back in if you haven't played it in a bit. Moving on to that new PlayStation 5 model, because sure enough, as we get closer and closer to the street date of this thing being available, we were bound to see IRL photos just a little bit prior, and that's what happened this past week. So we finally have some real, true comparison photos of the new PS5 compared to the existing one. Now, it's not the most fair one-to-one comparison, because the photos we do have show aftermarket plates on the existing model, so at least with the fins that tend to protrude a little bit past the middle black glossy portion of the PS5, that would show that it's usually a little bit taller than the pictures we're seeing now. But even still, it gives you a decent idea of, okay, just how slim is this thing really going to be, or not slim. Again, it really depends on your sort of perception around that entire idea of, does it earn the PS5 Slim moniker? I still find that it does, if only because, typically with, like, in terms of height, right? So vertically, it doesn't look like it's that much smaller, obviously. They don't typically get that much smaller in the, vertical standing height department. When you look at prior PlayStation model revisions, they really don't get that much shorter for a lot of models. It's always a matter of reducing the sheer volume of the console, which is better seen from a horizontal view. So from certain angles, you can see how this does look, what I would say is considerably smaller than the outgoing fat boy PS5 that we have so far. So, the overall footprint of the console is very similar, but it's still small enough in certain ways that I think it is a proper PS5 Slim. And again, I think for a lot of people, this would actually fit in certain entertainment centers versus the current model, where it very much is kind of an awkward thing to find a place for it. So there's that. The pictures also illustrate a few other things. We just have a better view of the glossy panels for the upper white trim. We also have a better view of the concave design of the middle glossy portion. And I still think it looks fine. Just a little weird with the disk drive model, where it's such an aggressive slope versus the smoother design language we have on the console we have right now. But we can also see the stand, which is just two little plasticky bits, very simple, which is fine. It's going to get the job done. I mean, I would say it's actually better than the over-engineered, weird rotating platform thing that we have for the existing model, right? So the only thing I keep thinking about is, like, man, this thing has got to be such a huge margin improvement over the existing model for Sony, because my God, it's going to weigh less. The product box is a lot smaller. They don't have to make this ridiculous stand anymore. They're not selling the vertical stand with it, right? So that's another thing that they're selling. It just seems like a huge margin improvement over the existing model. So it'll be interesting to see Sony financials once we have a quarter with this thing on the market. Now, we should also mention for the pricing of the new PS5 models, nothing has really changed here for the base models, well, outside of the digital edition, which is seeing a price increase. But the news here is for the specialized bundles that are being made available on day one, which for Spider-Man 2, that one is $559.99 USD. From what we know, at least. So that represents like a $10 savings with Spider-Man 2. But the MW3 bundle, which is coming out on the 10th, that is going to retail for $499.99 USD. So you're effectively getting MW3 for free. So not a bad deal there. And as an extra little bonus news story, we're not going to do this separately, but real quick, just had to mention, it is so funny how MW3 on PS5, for some reason, does not have its own separate trophy list with a platinum. It has it's a part of the entire Modern Warfare trophy package for MW2, I believe. So it's considered a DLC trophy list in this case. Only on PS5. On PS4, it does have a platinum, but that's so weird. Obviously, it kind of goes into the whole, joking shtick of, oh, it's just DLC, blah, blah, blah. It's not really its own thing or its own release, its own game or whatever. Obviously, somebody at Sledgehammer just made a really poor decision with how this played out, because they could easily just request a platinum trophy and it having its own list. But it seems like it was somebody at Sledgehammer that, made the conscious decision of the game's trophy list living alongside MW2 and it being one complete thing on PSN, and therefore it not being eligible for a platinum. But I don't know why they would do that. It seems like a really silly really silly oversight on their part. It's always in every developer's best interest, whether they're a small team or a big one, to always offer a platinum trophy. So that was just really weird and highly unusual. And it's weird. Definitely bizarre. Moving on to our next news story, the Sony Interactive Entertainment-owned developer Bungie, which is not a PlayStation studio proper, they recently suffered some layoffs this past week where about 100 staff were laid off, and it was a big story where the more you peel apart this onion, the worse it gets, because initially this started on the 30th where the layoffs were announced, and that's something where, employees showed up to work, there was a meeting, and then that's where they find out that their position was affected. And most of the employees, from what I understand, did get 3 months severance, but there is certain benefits that are meant to expire at the end of the month, and that's where, based on the proximity of when they did these layoffs, that's obviously not good, but certain employees were also still eligible for unvested shares in the company. And so if they're leaving, even though they're being fired, they're no longer eligible to, get that money or, be able to sell that interest. So that's unfortunate. And then there's just been a lot of ongoing news stories about Bungie's current situation, how their revenue is down 45%, that the next Destiny expansion and Marathon are potentially being delayed. And there's been some, just overall, downward sentiment across not only the company, but industry-wide, there's been a number of layoffs. I actually forgot to mention this, and I think it was last week's LTPS, but PlayStation did have some layoffs at the Visual Arts Service Group. It was a few layoffs, and I think some contracts were just not being renewed. And then also MWIII saw a reduction in staff as well, which is unfortunate, but given the scope of their project where they're starting a new thing and winding down Dream support, we don't have any idea of, exactly how that's playing out with what that new game is going to look like. But, at least for SIE across the board, it's, and from what I know at least, it's been a matter of the company really trimming down expenses. So at the time, it seemed like they were not doing layoffs just yet, but they were bound to get there eventually. So we do have some at the PlayStation Visual Arts Group and also MWIII, and by a certain association, I say that because the distinction we made at the start of this news story is that, Bungie is still technically not a proper PlayStation studio. They do primarily operate independently. That's not to say that Sony did not approach Bungie and say, hey, you're going to have to downsize. I'm sure there was something there to that effect, but it's more a matter of this was likely Bungie's discretion of how they were going to carry it out, right? How many positions, what positions, when to announce it, this and that, how they were going to carry that out. And it's also a bit weird because Sony, when they acquired Bungie, they set aside like $1 billion something for, employee retention. So to also hear that, Bungie was perhaps doing this in an untoward way to, have some of those unvested shares being returned to the company for some of those employees that were eligible to get those if certain conditions were met. It just seems very, iffy, like there's something weird going on here. But, again, I think this was unfortunately bound to happen. And we don't typically cover Bungie news on LTPS, obviously, because they are in this sort of weird spot where they're not a proper PlayStation studio, and we just can't, keep up with a bunch of Destiny news and things like that, right? That's not really what we do here, obviously. But when they have some sort of, influence with ongoing PlayStation news or overall news for the broader organization for SIE, I guess we will obviously bring it up, right? And so in this case, it was just a very interesting thing with how this played out, and if it was or was not Sony that had a major influence in how this played out. But if I had to guess as of right now, I think we are probably going to see more, right? So from what I know, it's been some major budget cuts at SIE. But with what the industry's been going through right now, and it's so weird too, because we've got all these major blockbuster releases coming out. There's been so much fantastic software, but on the back end, it's a lot of layoffs. And so I think we may see more from SIE. Not sure exactly where that would happen, but it wouldn't surprise me if we see more. So more bad news may be on the horizon. But for now, I'll just send out my condolences to all those affected, and I do hope you find work very soon or you're back on your feet very soon. Moving on to a minor update for the Last of Us HBO TV series. Variety is reporting, based on an HBO press conference with the CEO, Casey Bloys, that Season 2 is going to enter production in early 2024, and it is slightly delayed based on the strikes that were, the SAG strike's still ongoing, and the writer strike is now over, but they are going to enter production early 2024, and whatever timeline they did have, it does seem to be delayed a little bit, and that's all we have right now, but at least it sounds like it is going to be moving forward, because it's going to be quite a bit now since the premiere of Season 1, which was January of this year. Now, we also have an update on the Ghost of Tsushima movie, with the director Chad Stahelski speaking with Screen Rant, and he said that the script pretty much done, and it's more a logistical nightmare of trying to get everything all put together between scripts, availability, the strikes, the studios. That's really the problem there, but more or less everything's all coming together and they're ready to start, kicking this thing off in a big way. And he also touches on how with Tsushima, that's one of his, favorite properties of all time. He just loves the story of ghosts, which I agree. I think it's fantastic. So that I still also think is going to be, assuming it's executed properly, could be such a beautiful film the way that it's made, if it, stays true to the sort of values that made Tsushima what it is. But very excited to see that one get fleshed out in a meaningful way. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter, and if you'd like to win a $10 PSN code, then I have good news for you, because maybe it was just me complaining, but that was a great turnout, so the Linktree link worked just fine. It wasn't flagged or anything, so for now, we'll just keep doing that. If you want to try and win a $10 PSN code, it's very simple. Follow the link down below. That will give you access to the Gleam giveaway, and you can enter in to try and win a $10 PSN code, and I will announce the winner next week. Those are some of the news stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and our Tuesday video was another collection update, so obviously buying more video games, that's not really much of a shock or anything, so just another bi-monthly update, and I'll probably see you again, and that would be around December. Well, maybe not December because of Christmas shopping, so I don't know, maybe by sometime next year we'll do another one of those, but either way, that's it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.